Hey everyone, welcome back to the 443 Security Simplified. I'm your host, Mark the Liberty, and joining me today is
Corey, the organized ladybug knockreiner. Can you decipher that one? It's the opposite
organized.
of a group we're going to be talking about, or at least I think a ladybug is
Ah,
opposite of a spider, and
I would have
organized
said,
is opposite of scattered.
how does a ladybug opposite of a spider?
I don't know,
Like,
it's just
maybe a
cute and
fly?
small.
I've never seen a
That's
ladybug in a
true.
spider web.
Maybe I'll be an organized fly then. I thought
There we
ladybugs
go.
were cuter. And
They are.
watching the movie The Fly has already given me nightmares about
Oh
becoming
my
one
god.
myself.
Before we get into that, on today's episode, we're going to go over Microsoft's Patch Tuesday, including two pretty interesting, serious vulnerabilities they patched that you should hopefully patch as well. After that, we'll give an update or a rundown on what we know from the Snowflake data breach from earlier this month. And then we will give an update to what exactly is going on in the life of the threat actors that compromised MGM and Caesars Entertainment last year. With that, let's go ahead and fly our way in. So let's start this week with the first story we want to go over. This one was actually, I guess it's technically news from now 2 weeks ago, I guess, at the time you're listening to this. But basically, Patch Tuesday this month was actually pretty interesting. So the one we're not going to talk about that it's like equally interesting is Microsoft actually fixed a vulnerability in their Wi-Fi driver that comes with Windows that could allow anyone within Wi-Fi distance potentially gain code execution on your system. That one like set off alarm bells when I saw that one. It was a bit frightening at first glance.
I do want to talk about it because I might disagree with one reason you might think it's not frightening,
Sure, please.
but I didn't know if you wanted to talk about the frightening part first.
So I guess the one thing that stood out to me that kind of quenched my fears was them saying that a low probability of exploitation, at least as of right now. Whereas, like historically, maybe not historically, lately it feels like a lot of the vulnerabilities that Microsoft has been patching have been like actively exploited in the wild kind of things. And this one seems like they spotted it, fixed it, and so far no one has discovered it. But interested to hear
They
your hot
didn't
take.
spot it. That's incorrect. A Chinese well-known researcher who's spoken at Black Hat and
Ah,
DEF CON before spotted it. And I don't trust Microsoft as much these days. Their security seems to be getting a little worse with crap like recall. So I agree with you. They clearly say exploitation less likely, but everything else about unauthenticated, just have to have access to wireless, which by the way, you can do over multiple miles with the right Yagi antenna. It's actually a competition at Black Hat. And one packet, and you have remote execution. This could be very bad. And I tried to do a lot of research because if you didn't, I now notice you're bringing this up before the one we really want to talk about. But there are also things that may be BS, which is, sorry, I'm trying to find my links. There's, at least some Russian forums where someone is claiming for $5,000 they'll give a proof of concept for this.
that seems pretty
They
cheap for
I
a proof of concept
agree.
for
It
this.
seems also it's a Russian threat actor, and this is a well-known Chinese researcher. So the
Mhm.
Chinese researcher is a good researcher, spoken before, but I don't know if I trust a Russian underground selling it for 5,000. But they at
Mhm.
least have a little more than average detail here, so we can't really trust these reports yet. And I will admit, you and I both know there is a type of vulnerability that on paper is really bad, but there's lots of caveats about different memory overflows that can make some impossible to execute. Not impossible, but let's say improbable on a regular manner. So I
Yep.
get that this could be possible, that it's not as bad, but it still got an 8.8 on the CVSS. And from what I understand, it would have been a 10 if the fact that it's wireless, so it requires proximity, is one of the main things dropping its score.
Right.
And
That makes sense.
I've every organization, every even security expert is telling you to patch this immediately, although none of them can like point to any exploitable code yet. Or so to me, it's all depends on we're looking at one thing that says exploit less likely just because there's no current POC. But I
Mhm.
wonder if Way is going to have a talk at DEF CON Black Hat. So just like the real Microsoft vulnerability that I think you want to go into more detail for, because we know this one is a big deal. I
Mhm.
think we're not going to learn all about this until Black Hat DEF CON, which is really the same as the star of the show, if you want to get into it.
Yeah, let's hop into that one then. So that wasn't the only big vulnerability Microsoft patched. They also released updates for all currently supported versions of their Outlook mail client to fix a code execution vulnerability that can be triggered just by opening a message. So this one was discovered by researchers at Morphosec, and they originally disclosed it to Microsoft on April 3rd. Microsoft obviously fixed it on their June Patch Tuesday. And while like details were a bit light in Morphosec's own blog, they did note, like you just said, Corey, they're going to present on this at Hacker Summer Camp this year, so at DEF CON. And generally at DEF CON, researchers will give the entire dirty laundry behind the vulnerability, including
Especially if
proof of
it's already
concept and everything.
patched.
Yep.
And this one was patched quickly by Microsoft, so I think I mean, the Wi-Fi one seems scary because it just needs to be proximity, but this is like anything in Outlook that just takes you opening an email and not interacting with it at all. At all, that's obviously a huge issue. Every user, even
Mhm.
for suspicious emails, will at least click on it. The one thing I'm curious is clicking on the email, which will open the preview, but doesn't necessarily open the email in a new window. I'm curious if that preview is enough because it's
My
technically an
assumption
email
is
open.
yes, because they
I
even
assume
mentioned there's like
too.
an auto open feature that can trigger it as well too.
Yeah.
And I
And
want to nitpick
go
on it
ahead.
real quick because they mention it's a zero click issue. I would say this is more of a half a click issue where, so when I think zero click, I think, Android stage fright, where all you had to do was send a message. They did not even have to like unlock their
Look
phone.
at
It could
it.
just be
Yeah,
sitting
yeah. It
there. Yeah.
just sit in
And it
your
would trigger.
messenger app, but it would trigger right away. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas this, in theory, you do at least have to interact in a limited way of just previewing it, which is still
Click on a
insane. Like that's
preview.
a pretty easy barrier to get
Yeah.
past. But
I
I don't
would
know.
say specifically, even as someone that catches and blocks fish, I usually preview the email to see what I'm looking at before I can call it a fish. So I'm with you. It's not like also zero click is a listening server that you could pop it whether a user is there at all. And like you said
Mhm.
with stage fright, the phone you can have the phone locked. It could be in a safe where you haven't used it for a day, as long as it had connectivity, stage fright could pop it. So this is not technically zero click, but I feel like it's as close as you can get on an application where, even if you're not going to interact with the email, shoot, in the way I have Outlook set up, I even have to preview it just to click delete. You know what I mean? You have to highlight
Yeah.
the title of the subject of the email, which will automatically preview it in my window just to delete it. So it seems like you couldn't avoid opening it almost if it works with the preview.
Yeah, I agree. So even if it isn't like traditionally zero click, this is a pretty serious issue. And if you're an organization that uses Outlook, so if you're one of like the 90% of the United States and most European countries, make sure you've installed the latest updates that came in June 11th.
Can I give you another argument why I think we've downplayed the Wi-Fi one?
Sure, please.
Look at this. It's the exact same CVS score, but look at this. It has the exact same thing the Wi-Fi has.
Okay, that's fair.
So I frankly, from simply looking at Microsoft's alert, which gives no detail, this is as likely to be exploited as the Wi-Fi one. And if an organization like Morphysec says they're going to actually release the details, I bet you that I'm curious what they think of the exploitation less likely part. Like, does that
Mhm.
exploitation, like, how are we even interpreting that? Is that exploitation less likely just because there's no known public actors and there's no known proof of concept other than the one Morphosec says they have? Or is that less likely because the exploit is not reliable? And
So they
that
do
that
base it off of basically, actually, they've got an entire help document that kind of walks through it.
Yep.
And so exploitation less likely would be what? Exploit code could be created, but the attacker would have difficulty creating the code, is the meat and bones of it.
And yet, I
Versus
think in
more likely
Morphosec's
is code is proven.
thing, they say they will also be dropping a proof of concept. Uh,
All right.
So
I am back to, well,
it's
I would say I'm back to being scared, but I'm Mac OS, so I don't really care.
oh yeah, we're the ones that run security for the 90% Windows devices in our enterprise that all have Wi-Fi Windows
Well,
drivers.
thankfully, we've got a robust patch management system
Yeah. Either
that
way, the
should
point
take care of that.
is even though this might be about one of the vulnerabilities, the answer for both of them is just Microsoft Patch Day. Go get them.
Yep, exactly. Which is hopefully something most organizations just automate at this point of soon after Patch Tuesday, getting everything tested and installed. That is probably one of the single best things you can do with low effort to really reduce your attack surface. But I mean, either way, I did not see. I did a bit of a search and could not find the discoverer of the Wi-Fi vulnerability anywhere on the DEF CON or Black Hat docket. But sometimes they do have late editions for like breaking vulnerabilities like this.
Yeah.
So
Did you
maybe
look up the company name? I haven't Googled that, but I do know Way has spoken to Black Hat before. And what was the last time the
Cybercriminal.
flaw was just research? Like it was what it's like a Zor. It was a very basic issue he found that was a huge flaw. But we'll see what happens. I
Yep,
would say you should take them both seriously and make sure to patch both of them. Even if the
awesome.
Wi-Fi one's hard to exploit, even if it's hard to get exploit code for it, I mean, come on, unauthenticated, just have to be in range if it's not worth taking a chance on.
And actually, so one last point on that one that maybe it does tip me back to the scales of a little worried is so like historically at like DEF CON specifically, the guidance has been, turn your Wi-Fi off so you don't accidentally join some untrusted network or whatever. This is one where if you don't like turn off your wireless adapter, as soon as this POC becomes available, like every single person with one of the little war driving rigs, would it be war walking in the hallways, I guess, is going to pop everyone that they walk by going through that conference. Anyways, so enough about Microsoft. Moving on to the next topic, though. So at the start of June, several Snowflake customers, including Ticketmaster and the banking organization Santander, confirmed that they had been the victims of a data breach after data stolen from them showed up in the reincarnation of breach forums. So breach forums, it's an underground hacking forum that has existed in some capacity for what feels like forever. It was seized and taken down by the FBI, I think 2 years ago now. But one of their most prolific users on the old breach forums, a group going by the name of Shiny Hunters, is actually now the new admins of this new breach forum that has popped up. And they are the ones that started posting this data allegedly stolen from Ticketmaster and Santander for sale on this new breach forums. Snowflake's, if you're not familiar with Snowflake, they're like a data lake provider. They basically do data as a service. You can sign up and store whatever the heck you want in there, and then I don't know, access the data at some other time in the future. That is not a very good description, but anyways, data lake as a service. So their CEO came
I would
out
just
and published,
it's like a huge database as a service. So think any
yeah.
organization that wants to offsite managing tons and tons of data might use them, or any
So
computer, any company.
their CISO published a blog post though saying that they had recently observed and investigated an increase in cyber threat activity targeting some of their customers, but there was no breach of Snowflake themselves, and they believe all of them were compromised credentials ultimately. I remember early on when this story first started boiling through at the start of this month, uh, one of the hackers posted data allegedly stolen from Snowflake themselves. And so it looked like it may have been a Snowflake breach that cascaded into these other ones. Their
And all
CISO actually,
the victims of the individual data, the breaches were known. So like it was known Snowflake customers, and it
yep,
was their information from Snowflake. So
correct.
if you see a number of customers have their data from your service stolen, or if the outside world does, one of the first assumptions was maybe the Snowflake was breached. But
Usually an accurate assumption too.
yeah, we'll share in a second why it wasn't exactly that.
Yeah. But so their CISO did address that data from Snowflake as well. said that it was a demo account from a former staff member and it didn't have any sensitive data at all. So, like a few weeks now after this incident, we're actually starting to get a lot more details coming from it from the likes of Mandiant, who was helping investigate a few of the customer breaches and also has now been working alongside Snowflake themselves to investigate this wider campaign, and a few other posts as well, including the news company Wired doing some investigatory journalism as well. But let's start with the Mandiant blog post first, where they published a post originally on the 10th, detailing basically this campaign targeting Snowflake customers, where they were originally tipped off in April of that year, when a customer they were working with, or I guess when their threat intelligence identified data stolen from one of their customers at that point in time. They contacted them for victim notification, did some investigation, and ultimately determined that it was a stolen credential that was likely leaked with InfoStealer malware. They had in May 2024, so a month later, identified a broader campaign, they said, where they so far have identified and notified 165 organizations that are potentially exposed to this campaign. But they did note that they found no evidence that Snowflake's own enterprise network was compromised, and every incident that they have investigated was traced back to a compromised customer credential, and almost always with no multi-factor authentication protecting that credential. And some of them dated back to breaches or InfoStealer malware from even 2020 was the earliest one they found. So pause there for a second, where if you're a enterprise organization and you don't have MFA for something like this, that feels like mistake number one. And
Yeah,
this highlights
for
the need for
sure.
that.
I mean, I do think SaaS vendor mistake number one is not making MFA default, but I have to admit we still don't even do that in WatchGuard Cloud, even though we have a free account, because it's hard to do without getting users revolting. But if your SaaS vendor, whatever it is, if any external vendor you share sensitive data with has MFA, it makes no sense not to turn it on. You should turn it on, period. I would love to see it being on by default. There are, by the way, caveats. Like we jokingly went past Snowflake just being a data lake and we didn't describe it well. But when you hire a cloud data lake like Snowflake, it's not just to put your data there randomly. It's supposed to be there for retrieval from other applications. So you're going to have API integrations and other things with Snowflake too. So absolutely agree with you. These customers should have enabled Snowflake's MFA. I bet you, and based on their own blog post, Snowflake might consider making MFA default. But no matter what, they're going to have service account issue. Like a service account is a non-interactive, non-human account, and MFA is an option there. We can or may not get into that in more detail if you want, Mark. But service accounts are the one. When you have these cloud services, a lot of the time it's not people logging on to them, it's other applications you've designed to interact with them. So that adds a whole another level of complexity.
Let's talk about some of the protections you can do for that, though. So, like Snowflake even released a hardening guide early on during this investigation, and they pointed to like network allow lists as a good way to help handle service accounts. Where maybe if you cannot enable MFA, at least you can prevent someone that steals the credential from being able to log straight in from anywhere in the world. And that's where using like network ACLs, so restricting based off IP address, can really help secure those types. Maybe not secure the account, but at least limit the damage if someone does compromise one of those credentials.
Yeah, I'm trying to find them. They have Snowflake has a lot of best practices on the best ways, and I think many of these existed before the breach
Yep.
on how to authenticate to them. I'm not finding it as quickly as I could want to, but there's a two-part series, one that talk about how hackers break into accounts using different types of credential theft, but then the follow-up was how you can secure service accounts with things like key pairs or OAuth instead.
Yeah. So speaking of breaking into accounts, let's pivot to that Wired story now too, where they actually went out and got in contact with someone from Shiny Hunters to ask about the Ticketmaster breach itself. And the Shiny Hunters member actually claimed that Their original access came by going after a firm called EPAM Systems, which is basically a contractor that had access to Ticketmaster and other victim organizations too. And they claimed that they compromised a Ukrainian EPAM Systems employee's laptop with InfoStealer malware through a spearfish attack. And that through that, they found unencrypted usernames and passwords that were used to manage EPAM Systems customers' Snowflake accounts, including Ticketmaster. They claim they found it in like their Jira ticketing system and exfiltrated those and then used them to access the customers. They even gave a list of what appeared to be EPAM worker credentials from their own internal Active Directory server as proof that they had a inside on that organization. But EPAM came back to Wired when they requested for comment, saying they think the attacker is making all of that up. And it gets kind of interesting in here. So Wired contacted another like independent security researcher, or was working with one at least, and specifically a unnamed researcher that's been helping negotiate the ransomware interactions between shiny hunters and victims of the Snowflake campaign. And that researcher pointed Wired to a underground forum where they had credentials from a Ukrainian EPAM employee's machine that were stolen with InfoStealer malware, and a URL that pointed to Ticketmaster's Snowflake account as well, just on this underground forum. And so it's possible that maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle here.
I pulled down the article, but I think I also remember that Wired forwarded, after EPAM's president denied that it had anything to do with them, they forwarded that underground list to the public relations people and didn't get a reply.
That's the oh crap response to comment.
It's an interesting he said, she said. I don't lean on trusting threat actors even. I mean, I don't know whether forum people that run a forum are gray hat or black hat. It seems shiny hunters are pretty darn black. What am I talking about? But either way, while I don't trust them, I mean, if they're showing you image like they don't always lie. So
Correct.
I'll be curious.
So I think it's
and Mandiant also is finding data that there were credentials involved.
Well, so I feel like the truth is there probably was InfoStealer malware. And I think the less likely truth is that like shiny hunters were the ones that placed it there, since typically their method of operation is go and buy or find credentials on the underground and use
or
them.
They run the
like,
underground where other people post
Correct.
credentials too, so they can get access to them in some ways. They may even be, if they're the moderators of the forum, sometimes the moderators have to validate the seller's files are legit, so they may even have unpaid for access to some of the samples.
So I feel like a more likely scenario is they found them, they were valid, they used them, but now they're trying to like claim credit for being the ones that actually popped them too. And that sounds like something a threat actor with their history would potentially do. But so like main takeaways from this was it does not look like Snowflake themselves were compromised. This is just a big credential stuffing attack, or not even credential stuffing, like valid credentials found from info stealers being used
Maybe
against
just a
customers.
targeted credential attack even.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for sure. MFA, man.
Yeah, MFA or like SAML authentication to something that does support MFA is definitely the way to secure this type of account.
And for service accounts, think about alternate ways than just passwords. And if you must use a password for a service account, that's where you need to break out your real passwords. And by real passwords, I mean 32 random characters that you can never remember and you store in a vault that only people with the ability to test service accounts are able to get to.
You mean not in a text file on your desktop to make it easy the next time you want to deploy your app?
Yeah, and not a password that says Snowflake 123 bang for your API.
I am actually very interested. I'll have to do some more digging to see what some of these credentials actually were and if they were just as garbage as that.
I'm making it up for the. Hopefully, no one uses a service account password that bad. But we've seen
history says
crap.
that potentially yes. So I guess if you are a Snowflake customer, turn on MFA yesterday. So the last story for today is a bit of an update to a saga that's been ongoing for a while now. So last summer, you probably remember both MGM and Caesars Entertainment suffered pretty massive ransomware attacks. one of them paying and restoring services a little bit quicker, one of them not paying and restoring services quite a bit later. Those ransomware attacks were carried out by a combination of AlphaV or Black Cat, which is the ransomware as a service operator, and Scattered Spider, which was the affiliate that gained access and deployed that ransomware. So MGM, if you remember Scattered Spider, they claimed they social engineered the casinos, both of them, in order to gain their access. In the MGM case, they actually went after and found employees on LinkedIn first, and then called into MGM's IT team, claiming to be one of those employees, needing assistance to get into their accounts. Ultimately, leveraged that into root access to their Okta and Azure tenants. When MGM noticed the activity, they disabled those Okta servers, which brought down all their services. But Scattered Spider already had their access and deployed ransomware to 100 different victims there. Well, Scattered Spider, the head of the organization, was arrested in Spain just a couple of weeks ago. And a couple of things stood out to me for this. First off, it was a UK national. And you don't typically, I'm going to backtrack that. Lately, it does feel like we've seen a lot of folks from what I'd consider like Western countries that normally. Okay, let me pause for a sec. So normally when you see like threat actors like Black Cat or AlphaV themselves, they're typically based out of Russia or even Ukraine or some Eastern European country where they're a little more lax on enforcing international cybercrime laws. You typically don't see them, it feels like, out of like the US or the UK, where like the FBI can literally walk up to your house and arrest you. So it's surprising finding the leader of a pretty big social engineering organization actually be from the United Kingdom. Now, the reason I wanted to walk that back originally, though, because remember, who were the ones that went after Rockstar and Uber and Microsoft just a year and a half ago or so that ended up being like a 16-year-old kid out of like Oxford, United Kingdom. Man,
Marcus Hutchins.
Not Marcus Hutchins, but I mean, that is an example of a malware author. Rockstar hack kid was Lapsus. That's the one I'm looking for. Where that was a group based out of the UK, and they did get arrested. So I guess this isn't the only example of that. But anyways, this is a success story for international law enforcement bringing down the head honcho for one of these organizations. And it looks like there may have been a pretty big lapse in OPSEC for this individual.
Yeah,
So
I will say,
Brian
by the
Krebs,
way, 27 million is still a lot of money for a Western. Like, you're right, Westerns have more laws around cybercrime, and more democratized Western countries have less blind eye towards cybercrime. But just to not get off the subject of Western, I think there are plenty of American and UK hackers, Black Hat too. But more lately, state-sponsored stuff seems to be in other countries. But I think cybercrime, especially this more scammy crap, I feel like I sometimes have seen a lot of like 40-year-olds in Florida that aren't doing super technical hacking, but are doing the more scammy cybercrime. But anyways, it's 27 million. There's criminals everywhere. We obviously have a bias against nation state hacking, and for that, I don't think we like. I think it's authoritarian states that tend to turn a blind eye to other cybercrime to push their state-sponsored stuff. But as much as we talk about China, North Korea, Russia, and Brazil being hotspots, U.S. has been traditionally and even now probably still a hotspot. So
it seems significantly
I
more
think
risky
you're
to be
right. The
operating
risk is
in the
higher
US.
here. So what you're about to get to, your OPSEC better be darn good. You better be proxying to not come from the US and doing multiple proxies to try to hide from our authorities. But
Or maybe not
yeah,
using your name for your handle on your
oh
illegal
yeah,
underground Telegram
not,
channel. So that was what I
not
wanted to
smart.
point out. So his name, as outed by Brian Krebs, was Tyler Buchanan. And it turns out his username he was using on underground SIM swapping Telegram channels was Tyler B, which Like that
By the
doesn't
way,
immediately give you
VX
away.
Underground is not like VX Underground. I follow them on
Yeah, they're
Twitter.
just a Twitter account. Yep.
They release all kinds of like they're a known share malware with the community for the good guys. So I'm
Yep.
sure you can talk about bad things like sim. Even the good guys things talk about how sim swapping works to protect against it. But I wouldn't
Well,
consider VX Underground a malicious underground.
the Telegram channel that he was on, though, was
That
absolutely
one
dedicated
was
towards sim swapping. They even
absolutely.
had a leaderboard where they would list like of their members who's like the highest ranking number 1 through 100 of like number of victims for sim swapping attacks. And both Tyler B and one of his accomplices were listed on there too. So I guess one of their other accomplices was arrested in January out of Florida, so a U.S. national there as well. After he stole $800,000 from victims over the last year or so, he went by the nickname Sosa on underground forums. And this Krebs article that you're highlighting actually at the end had a really interesting bit about some of the just super sketchy stuff that goes on in these underground forums and these underground marketplaces. So apparently there's an entire, what do they call it, violence as a service offering that some other competitors, I guess you would call them, in the sim swapping space were using to go after some of these folks from Scattered Spider. So there was a story where like Tyler Sosa, his accomplice, had a brick thrown through his window or the window of his parents' house. And the video of that was recorded and posted online as like a threat to them. There was a member of Sosa's crew was actually kidnapped, beaten, and held at gunpoint, and then ransomed for $200,000 worth of Bitcoin after by one of these violence as a service offerings. Tyler Buchanan, the guy that was just arrested, his home was broken into in 2023. His mother was assaulted, and he was threatened with a blowtorch if he didn't give up his cryptocurrency wallets, which is why he ended up fleeing to Spain in this case. This is absolutely insane. This is some like movie stuff out of there that I mean, I assume that
You get
cyber
into
criminals will
crime
be
and you
criminal, but
steal 27 million and you're known to have that much in your public wallet, and the
yeah,
people who know are other people that are members. Like I why would you be surprised that criminals, especially
it's
when we talk
insane.
about how organized crime has attached themselves to cybercrime as a, they may not have the expertise but they recruit it and then they can use their traditional violence, mobster activities to take the money from the people they're using to
Just
get
makes
into
me
cybercrime.
personally glad I chose the white hat side of things
Yeah,
and
no,
didn't
thank
go down
you.
that path.
Too much
That
risk. I would like to get
that's insane.
rich legitimately, not in that sort
You
of
and me
way.
both. So either way, like this, he was the alleged ringleader from this social engineering organization that's had a lot of damages over the years. Like they were responsible for the Okta breaches from last year that ended up impacting victims like Twilio, LastPass, DoorDash, Mailchimp. In fact, that LastPass breach is the one that ended up with the pretty massive one in November of 2022, where they basically gained access to everyone's password vaults and caused a lot of damages for LastPass. So they were pretty great at what they did in terms of social engineering paired with SIM swap. I guess SIM swapping involves social engineering. So I, for one, am glad that they were able to get arrested and will soon be held for justice somewhere in the world, whether it be the UK or the US. I imagine the US is going to want to fight to extradite them for going after so many US private organizations. But man, crazy, absolutely crazy. I being held with a blowtorch to give up your cryptocurrency wallets is terrifying.
Well,
I
now he
have
doesn't
just a
have
tiny
to
bit of
worry about it because he'll be in jail. I'm sure no one will try to beat him up there, and he won't have
empathy.
his crypto wallet.
This does typically the FBI does a good job of seizing cryptocurrency wallets from people that are arrested. And so it's possible that victims may get some restitution at some point from some of
It'd be
those events.
interesting.
But either way, man, crazy week. Absolutely crazy week. And looking forward. Well, no, I'm not looking forward. I hope we have a nice calm week next week where absolutely nothing happens and we can actually just relax for a little bit. Oh, you're going to be off next week. Lucky you. I'm the
Yeah,
one dealing with the house on fire.
sorry. I need 1 week. Hey, let's
I
be honest here. You're
very much
often
earned.
dealing with the house on fire for me, so it's not like you don't run the sock with your team.
And to be clear, house on fire doesn't always mean house on fire. It's just tough not to feel stressed in the space that we're in.
Yep,
So enjoy your week off, Corey. You have definitely earned it, and I will grab one
you'll
here
get
at
one
some point
soon,
too.
I'm sure.
Thank you. Yes, hopefully someday. Maybe. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. As always, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. If you have any questions on today's topics or suggestions for future episode topics, keep them to yourself. I mean, you can reach out to us on Instagram. We're at watchguard_technologies. Thanks again for listening, and you will hear from one of us next week.